Welcome to Nerd Vibes. I'm your host, Ray, aka Armed Dark Mamba. What's going on, everybody? It's your host, Armed Dark Mamba, and we're back with another episode of Nerd Vibes. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about Blue Beetle, the movie, what I thought, and how it did in the box office, as well as some other details related to the movie. Spoilers ahead on that one. And then, after we get done talking about Blue Beetle, we are going to be doing a character study on Loki, the MCU version of Loki, and how he has changed from Thor 1 all the way up into the events of Loki Season 2, where he is now, where he's been, and some of the events in that time that has shaped the character and how we view him now. The character of Loki has definitely become one of my favorite characters in all of the MCU, so I am very happy that his story has come to a very satisfying end. Spoilers ahead for that one if you haven't seen Loki Season 2. But again, I'm very excited to do his character study now that his character arc is over, and I hope you guys enjoy the episode. But first, let's get into Blue Beetle. Before I get into my review of Blue Beetle, let's go over some of the numbers. It released August 2023, has a 78% on the tomato meter, Rotten Tomatoes, 91% audience score, typical on Rotten Tomatoes. You see that a lot. 61% Metacritic, 6 out of 10 IMDb, and 70% of Google users liked the movie. It made 72 million domestic, 56 million worldwide, and if you're keeping track at home, that is technically a bomb of a movie. But it did receive a second life on streamers when it debuted in September on streaming services, and it became the second most watched movie on streamers when it released, only behind Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So that should tell you something about the movie's popularity along with the audience score from Rotten Tomato. But now that we got the numbers out of the way, let's get into the review. In this movie, we follow our main character, Jaime Reyes, as he comes home after he graduated college to find out that his family has been going through a lot of personal things that they did not tell him about. His father had a heart attack, for instance. They're also losing the house to Cord Industries, who has bought the land and made their rent very, very expensive for them. So he comes home, and it is a very different situation than when he left. And he's just finding out about this. And his family tells him, we didn't want to basically let you know all this stuff while you're still in college, and we wanted you to focus on your education. Very noble of them. So that leads Jaime on a quest to kind of get his family out of the situation. So he starts looking for jobs. That leads him to the Cord Industries, where he meets up with one of the other main characters, Jenny, and acquires the thing that gives him his superpowers, the Scarab. And that kind of what sets him down the path of his superstardom. Now, this movie I felt was really, really good. It had very heartwarming moments, a lot of comedy. The action was nice. It was just one of the better entries from the DCEU. I felt like doing a smaller, self-contained side character, so to speak, in Blue Beetle, and keeping the movie self-contained within the very small city that they were in the confines of this one hero. We didn't have any cameos. We didn't have any other outside plots from other movies coming to intervene into this movie. We did get mention of Superman and Batman and The Flash. So there are hints to those characters in the universe, but again, they didn't show up in the movie, which was very good, very refreshing, especially since we get all these different multiversal stories coming from the MCU and some of which coming from the DCU. I'm glad to see a story that is very self-contained and within itself as a movie. Now, the best part about the movie was, in my opinion, Blue Beetle and the relationship that they were developing with each other in terms of the Scarab and how the Scarab has a mind of its own. And when it attaches to a user, it becomes symbiotic in terms of it takes over the host's nervous system and they become 1. I feel like now is a good time to explain the Scarab and how it works with Jaime so that I can further explain the review and why I feel like this is one of the better parts of the movie. So the Scarab is an alien technology that also has some mystic properties that is sent from an alien race to attach to the host of that said race that they land on. In this case, it's Earth. And it's supposed to attach to the strongest life form on the Earth or the most dominant species on the planet. So in this case, if it was doing the right thing, it should have attached to someone like, let's say, since he was mentioned in the movie, Superman or Batman, considering Superman would be the strongest being on Earth and Batman would be a representation of one of the stronger, more dominant species on Earth. So it should have attached to one of those people, but it didn't. It is malfunctioning for whatever reason. It's not really touched upon on why it's malfunctioning in the movie. There are comic book reasons, but we're going to focus on the movie at this point. The Scarab then attaches itself to Jaime, and once it attaches to Jaime, it starts spreading and attaching itself to Jaime's nervous system, essentially fusing with his body, and they become one symbiotic. The Scarab has a mind of its own and a name. It's Kajida, if I believe I'm saying that right. And Kajida helps Jaime in certain situations, and its directive is to protect its host. So in times of danger, it will do what is necessary to protect the host. So that's how Jaime gets his powers. Now, the reason that this, in my opinion, is the best part of the movie is because it shows actual development from the Scarab itself, as well as character development from Jaime. In the beginning, when Jaime gets his powers, first of all, side note, the first transformation Jaime has into Blue Beetle is absolutely terrifying. Okay, it looks painful. It looks like it hurts. It looks like it's burning his flesh off of his body. There's ooze coming out of his nose and his mouth and his eyes. It is insane, absolutely terrifying transformation. But it is so satisfying at the end once you see the Blue Beetle armor. And by the way, another side note off the side note, the Blue Beetle armor, super comic book accurate. They did a great job with the Blue Beetle armor. Okay. Now, the relationship evolves from the first time where Kajida is basically taking over Jaime's body, doing whatever she wants, running system diagnostics. He flies for the first time in these scenes. He goes to outer space for the first time. Absolutely terrifying experience. If it was me, in my opinion, I would be absolutely floored. I probably would have fainted inside the suit. Then he drops back down into the atmosphere, which is also absolutely terrifying. He was literally on fire at that moment. I would not know what to do in that situation, given, again, I would be terrified in the first place that I was up that high, but I digress. Anyway, running a systems check, and at this point, Jaime has no control. But as we see during the movie, it progresses to where Jaime starts to gain more and more control, eventually starts to overrun Kajida's personality, and Kajida starts to do what Jaime says, which is not killing. And that's where we get a lot of his power, his arsenal comes from, where he has weapon creation, one of the most iconic weapons that Blue Beetle uses in the comics and in this movie, the staple gun. Very fun weapon. He also uses sonic cannons, multitude of swords, all because of the power of the Scarab. It was a very fun movie. And another thing I wanted to touch on, the side characters. The family was great. It was very heartwarming to see the interpersonal relationships between the mom, the dad, the sister, grandma, the uncle. All the family played an amazing role in the movie and the character development of Jaime ultimately, and showing that his family wasn't a weakness for him, but actually his strength. He says that at the end of the movie. Whereas, the villain of the movie was preaching the opposite. My favorite characters out of the side characters was Rudy, the uncle, played by George Lopez. He was amazing, super funny, a conspiracy theorist, all these different things, a crackpot scientist. But it was just very fun. The comedic timing and the relief to certain tense situations that Rudy, the character, provided was amazing. It was very funny. And the grandma, she didn't have too many voice lines, but when she came in, especially towards in the third act of the movie, just being a badass was just fun to see. Just amazing quality superhero shenanigans that you get in these types of movies. The other thing I wanted to touch on was how they actually depicted the powers of Blue Beetle. And I thought they did a great job. The CGI looked amazing. They did a great job showing his superhuman strength, his healing factor at one point, the flight, obviously, the weapon creation we talked about, and the advanced artificial intelligence that comes with the fusion of the suit. So if you've seen Iron Man and how Iron Man has the heads-up display in his helmet, think about like that, but 1,000 times better, because all of that is happening in your head and you are processing it instantaneously, and it's going through your suit and all that kind of stuff. So you're working together instead of the suit feeding you information, you having to see it, receive it, and then do it. It's all happening instantaneously, symbiotically with the Scarab, which makes Blue Beetle a formidable superhero. And that's why it was a lot of fun. So they did a great job depicting some of those powers. Some of the powers they didn't touch on was his energy absorption that's in the comics, and his technoopathy, or the technokinesis, or mechanesis, I think it's called. But it's basically the ability to control different types of technologies. He can use this for cloaking, getting off of the radar, so like shut down cameras, cell phones, things of that nature. So I would assume if we do a different sequel or something of that nature, that this power would come in handy. And it is stated that this is the first film in the new DCEU under James Gunn. And that's, after seeing it, I believe that this is a great entry and a great starting off point to the new Justice League and all the different projects that James Gunn has planned for the DCEU. I'm very happy with the direction. If this is going to be the first movie that's coming out, like I said, very small scale, homeward bound, and fun, plucky, funny movie that just was a good entry into the new DCEU going forward. So overall, I would give this movie probably an 8 out of 10. It wasn't the best movie ever, but it was, like I said, it was fun, was pretty comic book accurate, which is very important to me, especially for these DC films. The side characters brought a lot to the movie, but didn't steal the movie, which is very important. The focus was on Blue Beetle the whole time. So solid 8 out of 10 for this movie. I would tell you guys to go see it on your favorite streaming service. I believe it's on Amazon right now. It's on Max. Go watch the movie. It's a good, heartwarming movie. I loved it. 8 out of 10. Now we're going to get into the Loki Character Study. All right, now let's get into the best part of the podcast, the deep dive into the MCU version of Loki, the god of mischief himself. But first off, let's talk about who Loki is. Okay, Loki is the brother of Thor, okay, son of Odin, and the frost giant Laufey, we find out later on. He also is an Asgardian mixed with a frost giant, which we also find out later. And he, as the god of mischief, has the powers of shape-shifting, astral projection, molecular rearrangement, illusion casting, telepathy, hypnosis, and teleportation. Just to name a few. In the MCU, he does have more powers, and in the comic books, he is way stronger than this. He has, in addition to those powers, the typical strength, speed, healing, endurance, all that kind of stuff that comes with a godlike entity. He also has the ability to, as we learn later on, control time in terms of being able to pick which time he goes to, past, present, or future, as well as different multiversal travel. He can go to different branches of the timeline and all these things, which also adds to his godlike powers. His personality in the beginning is very different than the personality he ends up with, which is why we're doing the character study. So we're going to start with the personality he started with. He starts as a very selfish god, starts as a very arrogant god, sees himself as very much above others, very much above his station, and he also feels that he has been in competition his whole life with his brother Thor for the affections of his father Odin and for the throne of Asgard, which is a very powerful position to get. So in the beginning, we see Loki as a villain and at times in the beginning as an anti-hero. But again, the character study here is to talk about the evolution of the character, but it is important to note that he was one of the worst villains in the beginning of the MCU. So there's that. Now, something you need to know when we're looking at the character of Loki is that Loki is destined for failure. Whenever Loki tries to commit a plot, hatch a scheme, or do something that he feels is an advancement of himself, he ultimately, as a character, is bound to fail. So a list of some of those failures are going to be springboarded into how his greatest failure at the end of season 2 resulted in his greatest achievement, and how Loki as a character has used his failures to ultimately find himself as a person and to find his purpose. And through those failures, he has found purpose. So I want to give you guys a quote that he said at the end of Thor 1. And keep this quote in mind because we're going to come back to it later. For you, for all of us. He said that to Odin at the end of Thor 1 when he was, after he was defeated for trying to take the throne of Asgard. Okay, in that movie, if you haven't seen it, okay, in the first Thor movie, Thor and Loki try to fight for the throne of Asgard. Loki has a plan, goes with the frost giants. A lot of things happen. Loki ends up becoming king of Asgard for a little bit, and Thor gets banished to Earth. Loki then sends the destroyer after Thor, and then, Thor gets his powers back, all that stuff, yada, yada, yada. At the end of the movie, when he's defeated, hanging off the Bifrost Bridge by Odin, he said, I could have done it. I could have been great for you, for all of us, in reference to him being the king of Asgard. Okay, and that leads us to his second failure, because once he's banished from Asgard, he decides, okay, I can't be the king of Asgard. I'm going to go be the king of Midgard, aka Earth. And that brings us to his appearance in Avengers 1, where he uses the Mind Stone to take over a bunch of people. And at the end of the movie, brings the Chitauri army. And we have the Battle of New York, in which he is ultimately defeated in humiliating fashion, getting stomped out by the Hulk. All the other MCU Avengers take him down. But the most demeaning and embarrassing one was him getting slammed around by the Hulk. Everybody remembers the Hulk yelling him after he slams him around, puny God. One of the best moments in all the MCU, in my opinion. But he fails again to become the king of Midgard. And then the third time he fails in trying to become king, he actually succeeds again, because, again, he was king of Asgard for a little bit in Thor 1 before he ultimately failed. And in Thor the Dark World, I believe that's Thor number 2, he fools everyone. He gets Odin. He sends Odin away to Earth, and he becomes the king of Asgard. Fools everybody, and everybody thinks that he's Odin. Then, we come to Thor Ragnarok, where Thor comes back to Asgard, only to find that Loki has been impersonating Odin this whole time. And then they go on the quest to find Odin. And ultimately, at the end of Thor Ragnarok, Asgard gets destroyed. In all of these, I want to focus on these couple of failures before we move on to where we start seeing changes in his character in the MCU. In these first couple of appearances, Loki is very focused on being a ruler, whether it's of Asgard, whether it's of Midgard. He very much thinks that people should bow down to him, that he is superior to all these different life forms, that he knows what's best, that he knows, and that he is the one that needs to be in that position. One great character quote that Loki says is, I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose. And in these first 3 movies, or in these first couple of appearances where he ultimately fails in his schemes and his plots, He believes that his glorious purpose is to be the ruler, is to be a ruler, to have a throne, to be the person that everyone looks up to, that everyone deifies, that he is the God that he thinks he is. That's what he thinks his glorious purpose is in the beginning of these couple of appearances. He's trying to be what he thinks his version of a God is. In the next couple of appearances, we start to see his mind start to shift, his priorities start to shift, some of his actions start to shift. We also see it, some character progression, some flashes of these moments in the first couple of movies, but ultimately it is in the sake of a eventual betrayal, a plot within a plot to move himself forward in his schemes. But he does show moments of anti-heroism where he does put aside his villainous tendencies to do something for the greater good. And that leads us to his next set of failures, in my opinion, which is he's killed by Thanos. But he's killed by Thanos because he's trying to save Thor and the rest of the Asgardians from the now destroyed Asgard, from his decisions in Thor Ragnarok to send Odin away, not be prepared for Hela, and also fleeing to Sakaar, all these different things that he just did in Thor Ragnarok that caused Asgard to be destroyed. So he eventually gets killed by Thanos, which is the end of Loki at that time for a while. So he's actually dead at this point. So that's a failure in his character. He just is done. But then we get to Endgame, where we have the time heist shenanigans, where we have to go and get the Infinity Stones from in the past. So a past version of Loki before he died has taken the Tesseract and fled into a different timeline. And that leads us into Loki season 1. So right now, I want to talk about those set of failures. So you start to see in the time where he was killed by Thanos that he was trying to make a decision for the greater good. He was trying to save Thor, and he was trying to save the rest of the Asgardian people who were trying to flee when they got captured by Thanos' ship. And then we see in Endgame that he is already captured. He then receives the Tesseract and slips into a different timeline. In that situation, he made a selfish decision for himself to get out and to, try to continue living on. It led into the events of Loki season 1, which gets us to Loki's biggest failures, in my opinion. And the entire run of the MCU, Loki's biggest failures happen in Loki season 1 and season 2. But I'm going to take a break and we'll get to those. So coming off of his time shenanigans at the end of Endgame and into Loki season 1, this is where we start to see Loki change the most as a character, is Loki season 1, in my opinion. He starts the season as a prisoner, telling his captors, I am a god. I don't have time for these games. All of this is ridiculous. I'm better than all of this, than this entire situation. And he proceeds to get broken down episode by episode in his beliefs that he is special because he meets other variants of himself that he interacts with, one in particular being Sylvie. We'll get to that. And he also sees how all of his Lokis and the different variations of them have all failed in their attempts to do whatever it is that their schemes, their plots, and all of those things were. They have all failed. So the one thing that all these different Loki variations have in common is that they're failures. And that Tom Hiddleston's character, Tom Hiddleston's Loki, the Loki of the MCU that we know, this is a huge blow to his ego because he thought, that he was special and some sort of in a god, and he has been broken down and shown that that is not necessarily the case in the way that he thought it was. And he is shown that his destiny, his fate has always been to fail. So whatever he tries to do, it's always become a failure. And so that's leads us to the end of Loki season 1, where he's in love with Sylvie, which is a variant of himself, which, side note, that is weird. It was a very weird concept for me to understand that he was in love with a variant version of himself. So it's basically, if I fell in love with myself in a female form from a different universe, which was definitely mind-bending to me. But it allowed Loki to find himself through the lens of a variant of himself in Sylvie, if that makes sense. Because Sylvie, although she was a variation of Loki, had her own set of morals, her own set of standards, and she also taught Loki some of his powers that he ended up needing later on in the series in terms of his magic manipulation, energy pulses, and stuff that they would do together. Sylvie taught him that, which is a variant of himself. So he learned a lot from a variant of himself. So that's why I say season 1 is where you start to see the most character development from Loki as a character, and why I love season 1 so much. But at the end of season 1, this brings us to, in my opinion, the biggest failure he had at that point, which says a lot because, he got Asgard destroyed. He destroyed New York in the Battle of New York. He also did irreparable damage to his family in Thor 1, where he tried to take the throne. So he has failed a lot to this point. But at the end of Loki season 1, he hesitates to make a decision on what they should do with He Who Remains, and that gives Sylvie the moment she needs to go ahead and kill him. And by Sylvie killing He Who Remains, it breaks the multiversal loom, which is just a big version of basically a containment field that holds the multiverses together. And because he failed to make a decision in that moment, that allowed Sylvie, a variant of Loki, to kill He Who Remains. And that set up his biggest failure at that point, which is breaking the multiverse and the stability of the multiverse. And that sets us up for Loki season 2. But Loki season 1 had a ton of character development. You see, Loki was able to see different variants of himself and see how their decisions and their failures shaped them as Lokis. And he was able to take that information and then shape himself and change and start to fall in love, as he did with Sylvie, start to feel different emotions. He starts to develop feelings for Mobius, which is his companion in Loki season 1 and season 2, develop relationships with other people at the organization of the TVA, which is in Loki season 1. So he starts to develop all these more friendly, more familial relationships with these people. Whereas when we first see him in Thor 1, Avengers, Thor 2, he definitely sees humans as beneath him and not worthy of his presence or his gifts, so to speak. So that's where we see the biggest change there. Loki season 2 was huge in terms of, he got a power upgrade. That's where he learned how to control and manipulate time for himself, which at the end allowed him to go back to the moment where Sylvie kills He Who Remains, and that gives him infinite amounts of time to find the perfect solution. Okay. But this also means for him that he has to fail and watch his failure over and over and over and over and over again until he finds the right solution. And he tries different iterations. He goes back to different points in time to try to change things, to go faster, to change the speed in which they're doing things, to change the order in which they're doing things, he tries a multitude of different outcomes only to have the same result. And for Loki, that's him just experiencing failure constantly and continuously, all for the purpose of his friends at this point, which are Mobius, Sylvie, OB, all these other different characters that are still alive and helping him in the TVA. So that's a change in Loki's perspective, where he was very selfish in the beginning. He has now become a very selfless character, doing these things and experiencing this very traumatic and sometimes painful failures, all for the sake of his now found family. He continues on this path of failure after failure after failure, trying to find a solution, only to realize that the only solution is for him to fail to get what he wants, which is a peaceful life for everyone in the multiverse and a place where he can spend time with his friends and not be alone. And the thing that he had been fighting for, which is to just be with his friends, to be a normal person, to not be a god anymore, to not seek a throne, to not be the character that he was in Avengers 1 and Thor 1 and Thor 2, where he's seeking different thrones. He doesn't want that anymore. He doesn't want that responsibility. He just wants to be with his friends. But he failed in that mission as well. And at the end of season 2, he ends up on a throne of his own making, alone, by himself, holding the strands of the multiverse, as he has now become God Loki, or as some people call him, God of Stories Loki, which is a comic book reference, or Time God Loki, which is a reference to the Time Stone in the MCU. But it's this failure, this final failure, that allows him to seek the ultimate reward in having his friends be allowed to live freely on the multiverse. Everyone on the multiversal plane living out their lives, getting free will, not being intervened or being steered in a very specific direction so that certain things can play out in the multiverse for he who remains, and all these different things. Loki just decided, I'm going to fail this one more time in the thing that I want for the betterment of the greater good of the people that I love and all these different people on the multiverse. And I'm going to sit here alone on this throne that I didn't want and that I didn't need. But this, for him, which brings it back full circle, is him saying, I am Loki of Asgard and I am burdened with glorious purpose. Although he didn't know that his purpose was to be alone, holding the strands of the multiverse by himself, where he just wanted to be with his friends. But it's just a failure that allowed everyone else to get what they wanted, but he couldn't. And that's kind of the beauty of where Loki started as to where he is now. And remember that quote from Loki that he said to Odin at the end of the Thor movie, after he was defeated, trying to take the throne of Asgard, for you, for all of us. This is the last thing that he says on his walk to become Time God Loki, as I like to call him. He turns to Sylvie and Mobius, and they said, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's going on? They don't know. Only Loki knows what's going on. He turns to them and he says, for you, for all of us. And then shuts the door and walks out to his sort of demise. It's his demise as a character, but he walks out onto the time bridge, starts grabbing the strands of the multiverse, the Bowflex of time, as some people have dubbed it. I love that. So I'm going to use it here. Grabs those strands, sits on the throne of his own making, and is just there. And at the end of the season 2, you see this very powerful look on his face. It's one of, I wanted to say was content, but also one of a little bit of disappointment, one of longing, I would say. It was very, I think the word is melancholy, where he's very happy that he was able to do that for his friends, but also very sad at the same moment that he wasn't able to experience it with them. It's a very, very good character arc for the character of Loki. It's a very important character arc for me, for Loki. And I love him as a character, and I feel like it was a very satisfying send-off for a character that we've been with for so long in our lives. I think it was 14 years, something like that he's been playing Loki. Yeah, and it's just a great culmination to a character that we've been with for so long. It just means a lot to me as a person to be there and see that character from start to finish. It's very awesome. Now, I know why I talked about Loki, the character, and what his character development meant for the MCU and for the overall Marvel properties and Loki as a character. But Loki, to me, personally represents the ability to change in a person, the ability to not succumb to what you were brought up with or the cards that you were dealt. For instance, Loki was adopted. He didn't know that. That was a very painful truth when he learned about it. That's not something that I dealt with, but seeking the approval of your parents, something that I definitely related to. Acting out to get that approval, to seek that attention. Definitely something I relate with that Loki was doing. Obviously, I can't relate with trying to be a king of a godlike realm, but maybe acting out in class every now and again, just so that I could get some attention from my mom. Because I was the middle child of a straight A student, older sister, and the baby child of the family. The baby always gets treated with kid gloves. So I definitely related to Loki as a character, and growing up as a person, the ability to change that Loki has shown in his characteristics is something not directly because of Loki that I've tried to embody, but that I've seen in myself, trying to change and become a better person. Just like Loki tried to change and become a better person and ultimately did at the end of Loki season 2 and made the ultimate sacrifice to become the person that he thought and, in his words, fulfill his glorious purpose. I'm still working to be that person, but this is a good representation of the change that you want to make and the change that you want to be. Loki going from a tyrannical dictator, murderous villain to a very selfless, sacrificial martyr figure is a very good character change, and hopefully one that is very replicable on a much, much smaller scale to become a better person. And it just shows that you don't have to be the person that everyone thinks you should be. Loki went from being the god of mischief to the person who has single-handedly saved everyone in a multiversal situation. You don't have to be those things that people around you have always said that you are. You can always make a change. You can always be better. You can always do things that people said you couldn't do. I'm sure that there were people that were trying to tell Loki that he was not what he ended up being, and he decided to change his own fate. And that is something that is very admirable and hopefully replicable by everyone in their everyday lives. And that's just something that I took away from the overall journey and character of Loki that I feel everyone could take away. It is some of the deeper meaning that is there when you are talking about character development and character evolution. And coming from where he came from to where he is now, it is some of the things that you can look to. It's a good example, and I just wanted to point that out, and that's kind of the overall deeper dive into Loki as a character. I mean, here we are. It was great. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Next episode we will be doing is on anime. I'm going to do probably an anime recap of a bunch of stuff that I've been watching, just because there's so much that I've been watching. So we're going to finish this episode, and next episode is going to be our anime episode, where we're going to talk about all the anime of the season that I watched, stuff that I haven't got to, what I liked, what I didn't like. And then hopefully after that, we can get to some recommendations that you guys may have, because I'm always looking for something new to watch, new genres, new characters, new stories. I'm always looking for something new. So hopefully we can get to some recommendations. And with that, if you guys do have recommendations, you can go drop me a line on my TikTok, Arm Dark Mamba, on all platforms. It's super easy to find. Arm Dark Mamba. Go follow the Twitch, the TikTok, the Instagram. Arm Dark Mamba, Nerd Vibe Podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Nerd Vibes. We will see you guys next week.
It's a vibe.